the National Committee, and he will be very aware of the struggles in this country and the format that they take, having been involved highly in such struggles across the water, and he was going to give us his opinions and his feelings on how the Tories should be fought and are being fought over there. And I would say there will be some familiar trends and currents due to the administration we have here. So I'm going to go straight into that. I'm going to let you, and as I say, welcome from both the Ballyfermot and Rimner branch who have gathered here tonight. Thanks very much. You Rialto, sorry. I forgot our country cousins from Rialto. Sorry about that.
And the ranch.
I'm the Baron. On stage.
Listen, the pleasure's all mine actually. It's my first time in Ireland, and it's we've got your Sunday night, and it's having a great time. I wish I came on Saturday morning so I could come to your marvellous demonstration and hear all about it, and that's fantastic. Let me give you an anecdotal thing, because I'm a social worker and I work in a place in Bristol, and I work with a guy whose parents are from Dublin, and he said, "Oh, you're going to Dublin?" I said, "Yeah," and chatting. I said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, actually I'm doing a meeting." "What's it on?" "Fighting austerity in the UK." He said, "I think it should be the other way around. You should be listening to them when it comes to austerity, you know. I mean, you've got a bit of a cheek going over there saying how hard it is over here." But I said, well, I don't think it's quite like that. But nonetheless, in terms of British sense, the coalition government has launched an all-out offensive. I don't know if there's any way you can put it. An absolute all-out offensive against anything and everything, more or less, of what working people, particularly post Second World War, fought for. You know, in terms of the scale of assault, in British terms, it is, to quote a right-wing critic in the Times newspaper, the strategy of the coalition is shock and awe. And people might remember the term shock and awe in terms of the Iraq War. This is the strategy of the coalition. And indeed, Cameron, about 4 months before he was elected, had an interview in the Financial Times where he said, you know, "I'm a great admirer of Margaret Thatcher," of course he would be, "but my one criticism of Margaret Thatcher, she didn't go in hard enough, quick enough." Now those who remember Margaret Thatcher, you lived under it, you thought, my God, is that really the case? It sort of was in a way, but that will tell you what they understood. They understood what they were about to do was going to be deeply unpopular, will get resistance, and therefore we are going to go on a full-scale assault and we can't hold back. Thatcher's strategy, to be honest, in the 1980s was to take on one group of workers, defeat them, move on to the next, defeat them, move on to the next, defeat them. In the process, if you're in struggle with one group of workers, particularly the miners, remember it, was to try and pacify other sections of workers. What Cameron and the coalition figure, that strategy, we haven't got enough time for that. We haven't got the time and the manoeuvrability. We are going all out offensive. And when you look at the scale of the assault, it is, I say in British terms, quite breathtaking. One of the big issues at the moment in Britain, I mean, actually, you know, people say a week's a long time in politics. For this coalition government, actually, the last 10 days have been an utter disaster. They are the Midas in reverse. Everything they touch is a complete and utter disaster. And if you know, I won't bore you with the details, but they are lurching from political crisis to political crisis. And the recent budget by George Osborne, our marvellous Etonian Chancellor of the Exchequer, was an absolute travesty, and has caused, I think, much more of a kickback politically inside the UK than I think they imagined. And they were going to get some stick, but usually in budgets in Britain they have one. There's a bit of whinging, upset for a couple of days, and it sort of drifts off. This is, if you like, escalating. But if you look at one of the key issues, is the National Health Service, which obviously, in terms of British working class politics, is always held up as the greatest achievement of the Labour movement, and in many ways that's very, very true. You know, the formation of the National Health Service was a massive bonus gain for British workers. And essentially what the Tory and the Lib Dems are trying to do, the coalition government, is essentially to privatise the National Health Service. And this is like it's like something sacred in British society, like the National Health Service. You know, one thing the Tories have always done, they've always tried to do this, but deny it. You know, we're not trying to privatise. It's nothing to do with privatisation. We just want private companies coming in and a lot of market stuff and competition. Sounds familiar, that is privatisation. So what they do, for example, now in Britain, a hospital was part of the National Health Service. it was starting to fragment. They're now saying each hospital stands alone. Foundation trust is the term they use. Each hospital stands alone. Run it like a business, and if you make a loss, we'll close you. Right? Unheard of in Britain. Not only that, previously only 10% of beds, 10% too many, but 10% of beds could be used by private patients. Now it's going to be 50%. So if you're in a hospital, and you've got to survive, you're the managing director of the hospital, and you can use 50% of your beds for private patients, guess what they're going to do? There's going to be a massive increase in the use of private patients. Wait lists are going to go through the roof, so on and so forth. Private companies. So in Devon, sunny old Devon in the southwest of England, the childcare services for health have been put out to tender. And I'll tell you who's won the tender? Virgin. Richard Branson. Yeah, now they made a complete cocker at the trains, I can assure you that. So what they're going to do to children's health services, and that is the way in which they are moving. That's just one example. There's been a massive onslaught on workers' living standards. Huge onslaught. And I know in Ireland there's been a phenomenal attack. And I remember when we heard in Ireland that I think public sector workers was an 18% cut in wages. I can't believe that. And there was an atmosphere that wouldn't happen. Not because the British bosses are, nice and like the Irish bosses, not like that, but they wouldn't get away with it. Now, in a sense, they didn't come along and say it was 18% cut overnight. All they've done is a pay freeze, and we're now in the third year of pay freeze. And with the rate of inflation, we're talking around the 15–18%, and we've been told the next 2 years is 1%, and inflation is 3–3.5%, something like 4%. So you start totting it up, you are talking in 2 years' time, if they get away with it, of a cut in millions of working people's living standards of around 20%, 22%. That's what they're looking at. In the budget, also, they just said for all public sector workers, when it comes to pay bargaining, it's always a national thing. So I'm a social worker in local government. Everyone in local government, all in together, same negotiations. If you work for the health service, all health workers, same negotiations. They're breaking up. No more national pay bargaining, we're going by council, by council, by council. And that is, an ability for councils to absolutely stick the boot in. And in some councils, like Southampton on the south coast, they've already cut workers' wages by 5%. There's the council doing that, but it's a green light. So, I work for South Gloucestershire, it's a very sunny, rural, very English county, and run by the Tories and so on and so forth. The idea that, my branch of Unison, which is the main union for public sector workers, will go into negotiations and it'll all be sweet and happy. No. They will feel the ability, because they're not facing a national possibility of action, it's going to be local. They're trying to smash wages in that way. All sorts of attacks. I'll talk particularly about pensions, I won't go into the details, but a huge argument, fight over the question of pensions in the public sector, and one of the things the coalition have tried to do, of course, is to divide public sector workers with private sector workers. Suddenly, for a while, the coalition suddenly became the friend of private sector workers. Poor old private sector workers having a terrible time, you shouldn't complain. What's interesting, no surprise, any time private sector workers start to fight, and there is some indication that private sector workers are now starting to fight, they suddenly are not very friendly, the Tories are hostile and so on and so forth. So you have a very, very big assault taking place. One of the things in the budget was that the top band of income tax was 40%, we'll cut it down to 35%. And with a move to cut it down to 30% for the very, very, very rich. Corporation tax, another 3% off. I know Ireland's got very, very low corporation tax, and we're told that we have to emulate the Celtic tiger, and we should all go down the road of low corporation tax, and everything will be hunky-dory and so on and so forth. And I remember debating a Tory MP in where I live, and she put this line, and I said, well, actually Ireland's got the lowest corporation tax with Iceland. That doesn't seem to have really been a great success. And general laughter, except for the Tory MP on the platform, who didn't do it very well. But so there's this huge assault, and it has to be said, as always in these situations, the government also try to divide, not just through public sector and private sector. They're very, very nasty on the question of immigration, very nasty on the question of asylum seekers, and particularly they're very, very nasty and give a green light to Islamophobia, which is a very, very serious problem and inside British society. And therefore you have this situation. Why? Because, like Ireland, we are in a global economic crisis, which is very, very deep-rooted, very sharp. The British economy, when you look compared to the last, I don't know, since I've been adult, 30 years or whatever, I'd like to say it was 10, but it's 30. 30 years, in a sense, the British economy has changed radically. I'm from South Wales. There are no mines left in South Wales. The move from an industrial-based society has very, very gone. And one of the ways in which they shifted the economy was the financial sector. We were told in the City of London, it's so great, we should all be proud of it, and this was going to give us all wealth and trickle down and la-di-da-di-da. Well, of course, when the financial crisis hit, it hit very, very sharp inside the UK economy. And the level of bailout, we never really know how much money was pumped into the banks. But it was a phenomenal amount of money was pumped into proper banks. Phenomenal amount of money, hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds. Somebody said it's roughly around the question of 800 billion. I mean, who knows? No one's, they don't even, on everything else they audit like mad, don't they? Where I work, they audit everything you do, but when it comes to bailing out banks, it seems that audit doesn't seem to matter, and so on. So there is a very, very serious problem for the ruling class, is how you do that. Now, there are arguments inside the ruling class in Britain, and it is that they're all in favour of cuts. They're all in favour of austerity, that's a given. But there are starting to see rumbles about that is what's going to happen. We're now going into double-dip recession. The latest figures are not good. I don't know what it's like in Ireland. I think in Britain, each day you put the telly on, you get the newspaper, they go, so-and-so's profits in some business has gone up by 2%. We're out of the woods. We're all right. We're on the way. And then the next day, this job loss. It's like a roller coaster ride from the rich. 1 minute they get slightly wildly optimistic, and then they're sort of suicidal. It's up and down because they don't know really what's going to happen. But there is now some rumblings of, okay, we can put the austerity, we're going to stick the boot in, but that's going to undermine demand internally inside the economy, and this is therefore a rapid disaster. And therefore you start to see some significant sections of the rich saying there needs to also be a strategy for growth. But they are absolutely shooting in the dark, and in a sense, ideologically, for the government, there is a major problem in convincing people that this is acceptable. When they first came in, I would say they were, to some extent, they won an argument that something had to be done about the debt on a general level. You were in a minority who said no cuts. The interesting thing was, people can say there's got to be some cuts. What happens when it's the hospital or the old people's home or your wages? Suddenly people go, well, I didn't expect that. I didn't want that sort of cut. And so this is increasing. There was 2 weeks ago a leaked government report which said only 5% of the cuts have come through. 95% are yet to come. And I work for a local authority. Now that might be a slight exaggeration, but there's no question over the next 2-3 years the level of cuts inside social welfare inside Britain is going to get extremely, extremely nasty. I'll give you an example. Where I work, in the authority I work, there are 16 projects. They're called Sure Start. Okay, what they are, particularly directed at young mums with children. Very, very good. It was the one thing I would regrettably say, bless government, that was all right, I'm not going to protest against. I think everything else you did, you had to get your placards out, right? But that was one thing which was of benefit. 16 Sure Start programs, helping particularly single mums, childcare, in my authority, and it's not the board by any stretch, they're all going to close. Every single one is going to close. And this is typical of what's taking place, and it's going to be extremely, extremely brutal. Okay, so you have that. And you have some rumblings inside the rich about what's going to happen and so on and so forth.